welcome. Thanks for coming. This is a great turnout. Kudos to you guys for coming in. I am Monica Malcolmson. Amongst other things, I'm a financial services advisor at Baker College Cadillac campus. The presentation tonight is funding your education, financial aid. It's not necessarily Baker related. So there's a lot of information here, and it pertains to any post-secondary institution that you would go to that accepts Title IV or government aid. So, if you have any questions, feel free to stop me at any time. This is informal, so ask away. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. So we will talk about the FSA ID, how to apply for financial aid, verification process, special circumstances, and some different types of financial aid. So the first thing, the FSA ID, this is your federal student aid ID. This is your username and password that you use to sign documents for financial aid. So you're going to sign the FAFSA with this username and password. You're going to sign a master promissory note and entrance counseling if you borrow federal student loans. It's really important that you create this with an email address that's not high school related, because you need to be able to access that email to reset passwords and that sort of thing after you graduate. So make sure you use a non-school email address, unless your parent is a teacher, then that's a different story. But as a student, use an outside email address to create this. The student has to have a username and password, or the FSA ID and password, as does the parent, one parent in the household, because you both have to sign the FAFSA. You can create this before you complete the FAFSA. It's not like you have to sit down and do it all in one. If you need to space it out time-wise, sit down, create the username and passwords, go back later and fill out the FAFSA. You do create security questions that you can use if you ever need to go in and reset your password. However, anytime you do use those to reset the password, it's locked for 30 minutes and you can't use it. So really important to write the information down that you've used and save it. And there was a sheet, I don't know if you've all got one, but it gives spaces to write down all that information, file it away in your files or in your safe, something of that nature, because you have to use this every year to submit the FAFSA. So really important to keep it. One thing that you can do when you fill out the FAFSA is you put in your email address and you put in your phone number, but it also gives you the opportunity to verify the email and the phone number. And that's a really important process to follow through as well. All they do is email you and text you a code to go in and put in to verify it. But when you do that, you can use a verified phone or verified email to retrieve and reset your username and password, rather than using those security questions and being locked out for half an hour. So good idea to go through that verification process as well. You also need the FSA ID to log into the FAFSA if you ever have to make corrections. So if you put in something incorrectly, or the school instructs you to go in and make corrections, you have to log back in with that username and password to do that.
And only one parent needs to do it?
Yes, only one parent needs the username and password, the FSA ID, except for cases where you're doing a Parent Plus loan. Parent Plus loans we'll talk about a little bit later, but the parent that's applying for the loan has to have a username and password. So if it happens to be different than the parent who signed the FAFSA, you would have to create one then. Any questions on that? Everything is username and password anymore, so pretty typical. So the FAFSA is the free application for federal student aid. This is the basis of federal aid, but also state aid, and a lot of institutional aid is based on this FAFSA. This document is used to calculate an expected family contribution, or an EFC. And when we talk about EFC, it's not really a dollar amount that the family has to contribute to your education, but it's a number or a guide, not necessarily a dollar amount, that schools use to determine how much need-based aid a student is eligible for. So with an EFC of 0, a student is going to have or be eligible for the maximum amount of need-based aid at that institution. So the lower the better when it comes to getting those grants and scholarships that have a need-based component. But the government uses a calculation to formulate that EFC. It's based on income, student income, parent income, household size, student and parent assets, a lot of the questions obviously that are on the FAFSA. Nobody's privy to the exact calculation or formula that they use. We just know what criteria are in there. It does confirm certain eligibility requirements. If you're a male and you're 18, it asks you if you've registered with the Selective Service. If you haven't, you're not eligible for aid until you do. Just things of that nature. Are you a U.S. citizen? As of yesterday, the 1920 FAFSA was available. It wasn't working very well yesterday, but it is working today to my knowledge. But you can start filling out the FAFSA now for next fall's aid. So it's important to do it early. There are some types of aid that are first come, first served, so the earlier the better. If you submit a FAFSA and you have to go in and make corrections later, that's okay, because it goes by your initial filing date as far as those first come, first served types of aid. If you have a student that's graduating and happens to be starting school in the summer rather than waiting till next fall, you can use this 1920 FAFSA starting next summer. And there are no fees to file this application, so if you happen onto a website that's asking you to pay to file the FAFSA, you're in the wrong spot, don't do it. The government is really good about finding those sites that are trying to scam people for money to file the FAFSA, but once in a while they slip through. So it's FAFSA.gov that you'll want to go to apply. So not .com, not .org, just make sure it's FAFSA.gov. So again, the data that you put into the application is used to create the expected family contribution. That number does follow you from school to school. It doesn't change. So again, it looks at income, assets, family size. And again, even though it says determines a family's ability to pay for education, that's why pay is in parentheses, it is not a dollar amount that you'll have to contribute necessarily to the student's education. You can pay cash for college obviously, but it's just to guide for that need-based aid.
How many colleges can you list?
I think you can list up to 10. And you can always go in and change them. So if you put a school down, say you're sure you're going to school A, and then later on, and that's the only one you put on FAFSA, and you decide later to maybe try somewhere else or go somewhere else, you can always go in and change that. You can add them, you can delete them. There's no limit to the number of changes there. So once the EFC gets to the college, we have a cost of attendance. And the cost of attendance includes, the next slide will show you, but it includes more than just tuition and fees. But the cost of attendance minus a student's EFC is what equals their financial need. And that's where schools start to fill with financial aid, is they're trying to fill that financial need first. Student's financial need. You could get aid up to the cost of attendance, more than just the more than just the financial need, but that is where they start. So the cost of attendance includes tuition and fees, room and board, books, transportation, loan fees, miscellaneous expenses. It is driven by the school, but it's not just the school's tuition and fees or room and board if you're staying on campus. Like the cost of attendance includes transportation and room and board even if you're not living on campus. It's a number that is used for borrowing purposes. Students are allowed to borrow up to the cost of attendance. So a lot of times a cost of attendance will look really large, but tuition and fees, especially if you're commuting to school, is much less than cost of attendance. So just be aware of that. If you're seeing cost of attendance, it's not actual charges to the student's account. You would need to look at some sort of different statement that's actually listing the exact tuition and fees to get those numbers.
So just on that, I've met with kids and we've looked at that, and it really can, they have extra fees on there, so we'd actually call and say, no, how much is your tuition? If this student's taking 15 credits, really, how much are they gonna have to pay? They're gonna pay for their books on their own and get that price, and room and board, or what their meal selection's gonna be if they're living on campus, and just use that for the price. I feel like this is a lot of extra things that add to it, and why take out loans for things that you don't really need?
You don't necessarily want to take out loans, federal student loans or Parent Plus loans, to fill the cost of attendance, unless it's needed. But you really just need to look at your actual charges to your student account and make sure that those are covered. If you cover your actual charges plus go all the way up to a cost of attendance, you're probably going to be getting a financial aid refund, which you have to pay back later because it's normally loan funds. So just make sure you're looking at actual charges to your account when you're figuring out how much aid you need. Financial aid offices can help you. If you get a statement that shows you a cost of attendance, just be like, oh, October 2nd in 2018, I heard that cost of attendance wasn't my actual charges. Because it's totally different. Cost of attendance is for borrowing purposes. Some students, depending on their situation, might need additional funds. And so the cost of attendance, borrowing up to that number, allows you to get a refund if you need it for other purposes. Not recommended. I know on Baker's financial aid portal, the way that our system works, cost of attendance shows up along with students' financial aid awards, and it causes some confusion because the actual tuition and fees is listed on a different statement. So just something to be cautious of and be aware of when you're looking at those things. Cost of attendance is not your actual charges. So one question that we get quite frequently is whether or not students have to claim their parents. Everybody's in a different situation. A lot of seniors obviously live at home. But if you don't, just because you don't live at home doesn't necessarily mean that you don't have to include your parents' information on the FAFSA. If you're considered a dependent student by criteria set forth by the Department of Ed, you have to include parent information on the FAFSA. So some of the main questions are, if you were born before January 1st of 96, this is for the 1920 FAFSA. Are you married? Do you have kids? Are you in the armed forces? Are you an orphan or in foster care or homeless? Those are some of the, there's a few other, but those are some of the main criteria that are going to be used to determine dependency status. If you answer to no to all of those, then you're a dependent student and have to put parent information on. If you answer yes to any one of them, then you're independent and it would just be your information on the FAFSA. It'll guide you through it. The FAFSA is really easy to fill out. They're yes or no questions. If you need help, there's lots of help hints on the FAFSA to kind of explain what it's asking. Another question we get often is, which parent do I need to put on the FAFSA? So if a student's parents are living together and married, you obviously are answering questions about both of them, and that's their date of birth, social, all that stuff, but also their income. And if a student's parents are divorced or separated, you would typically use the parent that the student has lived with the most in the past 12 months. If the parent has remarried, as of the day you're filling out the FAFSA, then you have to include information about the parent and that step-parent, their spouse. If a student's parents are not married but are living together, you still have to answer the questions and give information about both parents.
Just a tip, if the person is kind of 50-50 back and forth, maybe they could spend a little more time with the parent who makes less money, and that way they can include that person's income in the FAFSA if it'll be helpful.
There's no check on that, so just answer the questions as honestly as you can and to the best of your ability, but that is true. Obviously, if your parents' income is less, your EFC is going to be less, which is going to help you. So to complete the FAFSA, you need those FSA IDs, social security numbers, 2017 tax information. So you're going to be filling out the 1920 FAFSA, but it's based on the taxes that you just filed for 2017. Balance in cash savings and checking accounts. This is for both student and parent. Any 2017 untaxed income, which includes child support received. Investment balances, stocks, bonds, real estate, but other than the home that you live in. You don't have to include the home that you live in. You also don't have to have value of retirement funds or life insurance policies, or if you live and work on a farm, you don't have to include that. If you have a business with less than 100 employees, you don't have to include that either. The IRS Data Retrieval tool is something really handy and something we really encourage you to use. This transfers information directly from the IRS over to the FAFSA for you. So obviously this is income information. You can use it for both the parent and the student. You have to have completed your 2017 taxes, obviously, and everything that it brings over for you is gonna be masked. It's just gonna say transferred from IRS. It's not gonna give you the numbers to double check because it doesn't allow you to change them. It's verified information from the IRS that's coming over. And use that if you can. It's really helpful. If you haven't filed taxes yet, you can't use it. If you recently filed, it won't allow you to use it either. It has to be fully processed through the IRS before you can use it. If your parents' filing status was married filing separately, you will not be able to use it either. And this is a question that it's gonna ask. It's gonna ask for a parent's marital status, and when you put in tax filing status. When you put in married filing separately, it's not even gonna allow you to use the data retrieval tool. It'll just ask you to put the numbers in from your tax return. So you'd wanna have your tax return handy, regardless of whether you're using the data retrieval tool or not. Have that tax return handy, and I'll tell you why. Because when you're using the data retrieval tool, you have to put in the information exactly as it appeared on your tax return from 2017. If there happened to be a mistake on your tax return, like with your address, something of that nature, you have to put in that mistake. Or if you put in RD instead of road or vice versa, you have to put in the exact information from your tax return in order for it to pull you up on the government's website and bring the information over. So just social, date of birth, name on your tax return. You do have to have that FSA ID again in order to log in so they know it's you to get over to the data retrieval tool, and the tax filing status. So that's why it's nice to have that return right in front of you.
Is the data retrieval tool on the IRS site, or is it right in the FAFSA spreadsheet?
It's built right into the FAFSA, but it's like a link. So it's gonna tell you that you're eligible to use the data retrieval tool and ask you if you want to link to the IRS. Otherwise, you'll just be taken where you put in the information. But if you have that link to IRS button, click it. It'll pop you over to the IRS website. You'll put in the information from your tax return. If it finds you, it'll ask you if you want to transfer now. You click transfer. It'll take it back over to the FAFSA for you. If it can't find you, don't panic. It's really, really finicky. So if it can't find you, just get out of it, go back to the FAFSA, and it asks you line by line. It asks you what return you filed, what form, and then it asks you line by line what numbers it wants. So it's easy to fill out. It's just a lot quicker, and it's a verified information if you can bring it over. So once you submit the FAFSA, you've got all of your information in there, your parents' information, you're going to submit it. You'll get an email notification from the Department of Education saying that your FAFSA was processed. You'll also get a copy of your student aid report. It's a really good idea to go through that and make sure there isn't any mistakes. One thing to note is that even though the Department of Ed says your FAFSA is processed, that just means it's been sent to the school. That doesn't mean the school is done processing it. So just remember that, because we get a lot of calls saying that the government said my FAFSA is all set and we've just gotten it and we're just starting to review it. So it usually takes like 2 to 3 business days to get over to the schools that you put on there, and then they have their own processing time. And once you get that student aid report, if you do see mistakes, at that point you could go in and make corrections, and you just resubmit the corrections and it'll send it to the school again. Any questions so far? Yeah.
Do you then get a notification separately from the schools, like replying to what? After they process it?
Yeah, every school does it a little bit differently, and the start of the school process is verification. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. But there's not really anything set in stone. It just depends on the school and how they process and notify students. And a lot of them with seniors coming out of high school is some schools are going to work your financial aid application because they received it, and others aren't going to work it until you've also submitted an admissions application. So that depends on their process as well.
And sometimes it'll just get sent to the student, so it's important to have your student be sharing their emails with you and let you know when they receive it, because it doesn't always come in the mail, which is a little bit tricky.
There's less and less mail, it seems like, every year they send you less snail mail and more email, so, yep.
Yeah, and just as a follow-up, I track all of that data, so when you receive that award letter or that verification, if you could send it my way or have your student bring it to me, just a copy of it, or send it in an email, that would really help me out.
Thank you. Awesome. Any other questions on the application itself? Okay. So verification. When your application gets to the school, so it's taken those 2 to 3 business days to get to the school, and they've started their processing. Some applications are selected for verification, usually about 30%. Some are random, some are error related. If there's something that doesn't look correct, it might be selected. Some are selected by the Department of Ed and some are selected by the school, but it's usually about 30%. If you're selected for verification, the school is going to reach out to you and ask for additional information to verify what you've put on the FAFSA. That's all it is. However, they cannot complete the verification process and award you financial aid if you don't follow up with that. So if you get a request for additional information from the schools you've put on the FAFSA, make sure you follow through or you won't ever get awarded financial aid. It's a federal requirement that once you're selected for verification, we have to fulfill that before we can award you aid. So one of the things that is frequently verified is income. If you use the data retrieval tool, that came over verified information and you wouldn't have to supply a tax return transcript from the IRS to verify the income info because it's already done. So that's one thing that really cuts down on verification is if you're able to use the data retrieval tool. And again, those requests come from the individual schools, financial aid offices. If you're selected federally, it would be any school that you've sent it to. But if you were selected at an institutional level, you may have to supply verification documents to one school and not another one that you put on the FAFSA. So just because one does doesn't mean they all are, or you know, you may have to supply documents to all of them. It just depends on where you were selected for verification. And as an advisor, we don't have that information. We can't tell you if it was a federal or an institutional selection. We just know what documents you need to supply to satisfy that. So if you get selected for income verification, it's a IRS tax return transcript that you would have to supply. If you didn't try the data retrieval tool when you filled out the FAFSA originally, you can go back in and try that. But if it didn't work for you, you'd have to order a tax return transcript from the IRS. So one thing that you could do to kind of speed things up if you wanted is if you're filling out the FAFSA and you're unable to use the data retrieval tool, you could go out to the IRS website and order a tax return transcript so you've got it, because if you order it by mail, it takes like 2 to 3 weeks. It's just something you could have on hand and you wouldn't have to worry about it if you're selected. You don't have to, just an item. Sometimes you have to verify a number in household or in college, and there's asset verification, there's different types of verification. A lot of them are worksheets that you fill out, so they would send those to you probably via email and fill them out for the school. It's a pretty simple process, you just have to supply them what they're asking for. There are some special exceptions. So if there is a student whose parents refuse to provide information for the FAFSA, a student would have to go through a process with the individual school, with their financial aid office, with some documentation, and if they truly have a parent refusal, then the student is only able to borrow unsubsidized loans, which are the ones that accumulate interest. And again, that is verified by each school, so it's not a federal thing. And the amount that the student is going to be eligible for is the same as a dependent student for 1 year. For a freshman, it's going to be $5,500. If that's all they have, it's probably not going to get them very far, because without parent information, if you're dependent, you're not going to be eligible for any other federal aid, Pell Grant, or anything of that nature, because it can't determine the student's need. So it's going to eliminate a lot of opportunities for aid. So even if you think that you make too much for your student to qualify, they might not qualify for need-based aid, but they're going to have access to other types of aid. A lot of institutional aid, so aid from the school, is based on the EFC and FAFSA. FAFSA is becoming a requirement for a lot more types of aid, even if they're not need-based. So if you think you make too much, you know, that's the boat that unfortunately a lot of us are in, but it still gives your student access to loans and things of that nature. If a student doesn't actually have contact with their parents due to an estranged relationship, then the school does have the ability to do a dependency override. Again, that is something that is documented with the particular institution, and their financial aid office would help you through that process. So if anybody's in that situation, just talk to the financial aid office. And aside from exceptions, there are some special circumstances. So if there are any circumstances that can't be reported on the FAFSA, like you think you've got this situation and they didn't ask you a question that, you know, pertain to that, you can just talk to the financial aid office. If there was a change in employment after submitting the FAFSA that has caused a large drop in income, you would want to talk to the financial aid office, because we can do professional judgments to reduce the EFC or reduce the income that changes the EFC for the student. If a parent has passed away, or if there's a large medical expenses that aren't covered by insurance, those are things that the FAFSA doesn't account for, but the schools have the ability to do that for you. So if you have a circumstance like that, definitely talk to the financial aid office, because there are things we can do to help you out. Also, I did say that's a change in marital status after filing the FAFSA. That's something that you would want to talk to the financial aid office as well. In the case of a divorce, if you filed the FAFSA and parents were married and then they divorced, the school has the ability to separate the income and only use the income of the parent you're living with to determine your EFC. And then after that verification process is done, or if you weren't selected for verification, the next thing to come is the award letter. So again, some schools award any student who sends them their FAFSA. Others only award students who have also submitted that admission application. So there's no rhyme or reason. You would have to call a particular school if you wanted to find out, or if you're serious about going to a school. A lot of schools have October is free application month. So you could potentially submit that application for free and at multiple schools to determine what types of aid they might have to offer you to help you make your decision on where you want to go. But the schools are going to take your cost of attendance, your EFC, figure out what your need is, and just keep in mind that it's those direct costs are your tuition and fees, room and board if you're living on campus, but that cost of attendance also includes those indirect costs. So make sure you're aware whether you're looking at charges or cost of attendance, because they're very different.
You can try it.
Oh, did you? Okay.
So, you filled out the FAFSA. Now what? The information you submitted will be processed by the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Federal Student Aid, and the colleges or career schools you listed will be notified so they can begin their process of awarding aid. The great thing about filling out the FAFSA online is that you can check its processing status immediately. This comes in handy when you're thinking, I wonder if it went through. Within a few days of filling out the FAFSA, you'll get your Student Aid Report, or SAR. You'll hear that abbreviation again, so just remember, your SAR is your Student Aid Report. Basically, it summarizes all of the information you submitted on the FAFSA. You can access your SAR online at fafsa.gov using your FSA ID, which is your username and password. Check your SAR for any mistakes. Then make corrections if you need to, but only if you estimated your tax information or provided incorrect information the day you filled out the FAFSA. On your SAR, you'll see reference to your EFC, or expected family contribution. This number is used to determine your eligibility for federal student aid. It doesn't mean you actually have to contribute that amount. The financial aid office at each college or career school you list on your FAFSA will receive your information. Each office will then use your FAFSA information to determine how much aid you can get at that school. It's possible that your college or career school may require you to verify the information you submitted on your FAFSA. If that happens, your school will tell you what you need to do. Once you're accepted into a college or career school, you'll get an award letter from a school's financial aid office that explains the aid being offered to you. We'd recommend comparing award letters from multiple schools. That way you can make the best decision for your situation. If If you have any questions about your financial aid offer, contact the school's financial aid office. If your aid offer includes a federal loan and you're a first-time borrower, there are a few more steps before you get your loan. You'll need to complete entrance counseling and sign the Master Promissory Note, or MPN, which is your agreement to pay back the loan. Your school will provide you with the necessary information. So how do you get your money? Well, usually your grants and loans will be applied to tuition, fees, and other charges on your student account first. Then any leftover money is paid to you. Work-study funds are earned throughout the term. Remember, filling out the FAFSA is not a one-time thing. You must complete it every year you attend school. If you have questions or need more information, please visit studentaid.gov.
There is a lot of good information at studentaid.gov too, if you want to check it out. There's lots of good information about aid, loans, types of loans. It's worth checking out if you have some time. So that is the FAFSA application itself and what to expect afterward. Are there questions on that? Yeah.
I have a question about the, part where it said, other children in college.
Mhm.
So when you're filling out the application, if you do have other children that are attending college, what do you just list their name, where they go?
It actually just asks you for the number in household and then the number in college.
Okay,
The nice thing about that is it affects your EFC because the government knows that you've got those expenses if you've got more than one child in college, so it does make a difference.
does it matter if they're stepchildren?
If they're considered your dependent, then
Okay.
that would be included in your
So do
household.
they have to be listed on, like, when you filed your taxes? Do they have to be listed on there?
No, FAFSA dependency doesn't really have any bearing on tax filing status or who you claimed as your dependent on your taxes. So it's really, a lot of people think there's a correlation there, but there really isn't.
They just may come back and ask for more information if they felt they needed it.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yep.
If the EFC comes out to be 0, how much will a student get from the Pell Grant this year or next
We'll go
year?
over that. We're not
That's
done
part of
yet.
Okay.
Yep, that's
Well, no, I
coming
see
up.
grants. Okay.
Yep, that's definitely coming up. Yeah,
When should you first fill out the FAFSA?
as early as possible. It opened
Junior
yesterday.
year, Senior year?
Oh, got you. You would have to fill it out during a student's senior year to use for the next year in college because it is academic year specific. So the one that's available right now is for the 19-20 school year, so it'll start next fall. So if you have a junior, you would want to wait till this time next year and fill it out. Yep, but as early as you can in the application cycle is always best. Yep. And they did actually, they made the website mobile friendly. So you can use it on your phone or a mobile device. It didn't used to resize very well, it does now, so that's handy. There's also a My Student Aid app that you can fill the FAFSA out on. It's not really like the first go-to. I would recommend using a computer, but if a student or if you don't have any other options, you can use the app. I don't know yet whether the data retrieval tool is working on the app. That's
It's
the only
not,
thing.
yeah, I was just at a workshop today and they said you can't make corrections and you can't use the data retrieval tool, so
Yeah, I know they
if
were
I were
working
using a
on
parent,
it.
I'd probably, this is the first year that they've had the app on the phone, I'd wait for it to get through that first year, that's just me.
Yep. There's
They're working out
obviously
some of the
lots
kinks
of
yet,
lots
yeah.
of ways to go to the school or a library if you needed to use a computer, but
Mhm.
yeah, and I don't know what their idea is because it's not just a FAFSA app, it's a student aid app. So maybe once your FAFSA goes through, I don't know if there's more things you can view on there. There might be more. It might be more of a tool like for resources than from like the studentaid.gov. It might have a lot of that information on there rather than just a tool to fill out the FAFSA. But I know that the website is mobile friendly. So now we'll actually go over the types of aid. So there's scholarships, grants, loans, and student employment. So scholarships are money that doesn't have to be paid back, so that's considered gift aid. It is awarded on the basis of merit, skill, leadership, or major. There are lots and lots of college aid offers. You can find them all over the website. There's lots of nationwide sites that'll help you search for scholarships, and they're a good tool. But you would really want to focus a lot of your time on local scholarships because the pools are a lot smaller, obviously. And I know your advisors and your counselors have a lot of help for you there when it comes to the local scholarships that you might be eligible for, could apply for. So definitely use them as a resource. Just be aware if there's anything that's asking for a lot of personal information, asking for an application fee, says there's guaranteed winnings, it's probably a scam, so just be aware. There are lots of scams as well as lots of good opportunities, but just be aware so that you don't get taken advantage of. But scholarships are great. Again, money that doesn't have to be paid back. So one of the state scholarships is the Michigan Competitive Scholarship. This award is set by the Michigan Department of Treasury each year. For the current year, it is $1,000 per academic year. And this is based on full-time attendance. So a lot of financial aid is prorated based on how your student is actually attending. If they're attending what's considered full-time, three-quarter time, or part-time, their awards could be adjusted. So for the Michigan Competitive Scholarship, $1,000 is based on full-time attendance. They do have to have a SAT score of at least 1,200 and have the financial need component. So that's that EFC. And the deadline to submit your FAFSA is March 1st if you're going to be eligible for the Michigan Competitive Scholarship. If you submit your FAFSA after March 1st and you meet all other criteria for the Michigan Competitive Scholarship, you won't be awarded it because of the FAFSA deadline. So we consider March 1st a priority deadline to submit your FAFSA because there are a lot of, especially state aid, most of it has a March 1st deadline. So that's why we always encourage you to do it early. Again, it's going to go by your original application date. So even if you did it today and you have to go make corrections in December, it's still going to go by today's date because you originally submitted it today. And then we have grants. Grants are also gift aid, money that doesn't have to be paid back. These are usually awarded based on financial need. And there are federal and state grants available as well as some institutional grants at each school that you might go to. And a lot of times funding is limited on grants. Once it's gone, it's gone. So another reason to apply early. Not all, but a lot of them are. The basis of the financial aid package and the largest source of financial aid is the federal Pell Grant. So the federal Pell Grant is based on income and family size. If you have a 0 EFC, it means you have the most financial need according to their formula. For this year, you would be awarded $6,095 in Pell Grant for the year, for the academic year. And that is based on full-time attendance as well. So if you're attending part-time or three-quarter time, it's adjusted based on your enrollment status. But that is what it is for the year. It's slated to go up to $61.95 next year for 0 EFC full-time students, pending approval, but that's what we're hearing. It's been going up a little bit each year. So that is typically where schools start awarding aid is with the federal Pell Grant. And when you fill out your FAFSA, you'll actually get an estimated federal Pell Grant amount. It's not verified until it goes to the school and potentially through that verification process, but that's based on the information that you put in when you filled it out. That's what your student would be eligible for, if any. Yep.
You said that it was gonna go up next year, is that like going into the fall of 2019 or the fall of 2020?
So this FAFSA that you're going to be filling out is for the 19-20 school year, so it starts next fall. They reevaluate aid for each new academic year. So the academic year of 19-20 is slated to go up to $61.95. Yeah. The Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant is also a federal grant. These funds are actually given to the schools to disperse. There's a certain set of criteria that the government sets, and then the schools have additional criteria and determine how to use that each year. It changes from year to year. But it is federal money. Its priority is always given to full need students, so those Pell Grant recipients. Just depending on how the school is appropriating funds and what your EFC is, you could potentially be eligible for anywhere from $100,000 to $4,000 a year in SEOG. Again, it does depend on your financial needs, so that's that FAFSA and the EFC. This is one that has limited availability because each school is only given a certain amount of funds, and when it's gone, it's gone. We actually had a big round of students that got a surprise SCOG grant because schools are going to award these funds, and then when school starts and students start attending or not, if they don't attend, then their SEOG funds go back into the account and they're redistributed because schools do have to disperse the entire amount. So if you get a notification late in the semester that you got an extra grant, it potentially is SEOG because the funds were redistributed. Yeah.
I just want to clarify, did you say that when you receive information back from the FAFSA, whenever the amount's coming back, what you're approved for or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
did you say that it will notify you if you should apply for this grant, or the grants you should apply for?
Grants are typically like auto awarded.
Okay,
There's
so
not an extra application.
You're not getting that through FAFSA. This is something you're going to a different, you're applying on a different site.
No. The school has these funds and they are awarding students these funds based on FAFSA criteria.
So once you go to the school and then you start working through their website.
Nope, nope.
No?
So you've submitted, as a student, you've submitted your admissions application and you've also sent your FAFSA to the school. So those schools that have both of those criteria met, you're good to go. They're gonna go through the awarding process. If you're Pell Grant eligible, they're gonna award your student Pell Grant. If you're SEOG eligible based on the federal and the school's criteria, they're gonna automatically award
Okay.
that to you. They're gonna award you your loan eligibility. Loans are not an auto award, you do have to accept them because some people don't wanna use them. Any type of aid that you're eligible for that's not based on a separate application is gonna come to you on that award letter. If
From
you,
the school.
from the school, right.
Okay.
Now, when you submit your FAFSA, you do get an estimate on how much Pell Grant you're eligible for, and an estimate on how much loans you're eligible for, federal student loans that you're eligible for. But those are just estimates. Those are just the two types of federal aid that they can give you an estimate on. Your true awards come in that award letter because that's after that verification process and processing at the school.
Okay.
Now, if the school has a separate application for some other type of institutional aid and you've already submitted that and you've already received notice that you've earned it or you've been awarded it, they'll include that on the award letter too. But a majority of the aid anymore is auto awarded, so there's not a lot of separate applications with the exception of like community foundation scholarships. Those typically have a separate application, but when it comes to institutional aid.
Thank you.
Yeah, and if you have questions about that, because every school is different, definitely ask the financial aid office. They'll let you know if there's aid that you can apply for separately. Baker College has gone to auto awarding for almost everything. I think a lot of schools are going that way because so much of it's based on FAFSA criteria anyway. And an incoming freshman right out of high school, we've got your SAT scores, your high school GPA, things of that nature that are used to determine what types of aid you're eligible for at the institutional level as well. So additional state grants, there is the Michigan Tuition Grant. This is based solely on financial need, which we get from the FAFSA. It is only available at independent nonprofit institutions, so public universities, you're not gonna see Michigan Tuition Grant. Baker College is nonprofit, so we have this. The maximum amount for the current school year is $2,400 for the year. Again, that's based on full-time attendance. If you have other types of aid, it could potentially reduce this Michigan Tuition Grant because it is not like a refundable scholarship or grant rather. So if you're awarded aid and your full actual charges have been met, they're going to reduce some sort of aid typically. And so this would be, but that doesn't include loans. They're not going to reduce other aid because of loans. So, again, this has a March 1st deadline. This is a state grant, so it's March 1st deadline for the FAFSA. The tuition incentive program is another great grant, and this is now, you have to file the FAFSA, And to be eligible, the student has to have been eligible for Medicaid for 24 out of 36 months since age 9. I think it's age 9. But they don't necessarily have to be on Medicaid now. And your counselor's advisors get notification on students that are TIP eligible. If they're not notifying you that you are or should be and you think you are, definitely go see them, because there are some students that get missed on their rosters. So it's a really great benefit. You do have to apply with the state before you graduate, or you won't be eligible for it. And you do have to enroll in school within 4 years of graduating, and you do have to use your eligibility within 6 years of graduating, or you lose it. It does cover tuition and mandatory fees at a community college, so a lot of students that are TIP eligible go to community college because it's paid for. You do get a reduced rate at a public college or university that accepts TIP, or at a private college you get $110 per credit hour this year. I think it might go up to $112 or $113 next year. That's what we're being told. But this is considered phase 1, so the tuition fees at a community college, $110 at a private college, that is based on phase 1 of TIP, which is for an associate's degree. So if you go right into college and you're TIP eligible and you declare that your major is a bachelor's degree, you won't be eligible for this phase 1 of TIP. Once you accumulate 56 semester credit hours, then you would be eligible for phase 2 of TIP to work towards a bachelor's degree, and at that point you can be working on a bachelor's degree. But that only pays $500 per semester for 2 years, so up to $2,000. So if you have a student that's TIP eligible and they're looking at getting a bachelor's degree, you might want to see if the school that they want to go to has an option where they can start an associate's degree and then finish that and move on to the bachelor's degree. A lot of schools have like a step from the associate's to the bachelor's, but then you can use your TIP, which is a huge benefit.
So I get that list, and Brandy and I are meeting with all those kids. I send letters home, and it's a huge savings of, it's like getting a $10,000 scholarship. So it's a huge advantage, and we want to make sure kids take advantage of it.
For sure.
Can you use that for trade schools as well?
Yep. And I have heard, like I say, there are some students that don't make it onto their rosters. So if your student has been on Medicaid at some point since age 9, you might want to double check. I heard of a school today that was at our counselor's workshop that he had a small class, but he was having all of the students register with the state, and he found 4 or 5 of them that didn't show up on his list that were eligible for TIP. So it's worth checking into if you think you might be eligible, for sure. It's a huge benefit. This is the information, it's in that slideshow packet for the Office of Scholarships and Grants. You could take it upon yourself to call them to see if your student is eligible as well, or talk to your counselors and they can help you out. But they're really great if you have questions about the state aid. I'm happy to answer. So that's scholarships and grants. Any questions on that before we move into lovely loans?
The one thing that's important is a lot of the kids retake their SAT to get a little bit higher. So for example, Central, if you have a certain SAT score and a certain GPA, they'll automatically award you $4,000 a year. And if you're off by a very little amount, it's worth it to pay the $35 to retake the test, do some studying, and get that score up so you can potentially earn a lot more in scholarship money, which is not need-based at all. It's all on your GPA and SAT. And most every college has it listed on their website.
Can you still continue to do SAT and resubmit a new score at any time? You can keep resubmitting your SAT to the college?
I would say if you're a senior, there's a test coming up in December, that would probably be a good one.
Redo it
There's
and then
one in-
resubmit it. Okay.
There's one in November, it's November 3rd, and the deadline to register is this Friday, if you wanna take it in November.
Okay.
Yep.
Thanks.
I don't know how many times it's offered in the summer, or if it
That
is.
varies, there's like a
But-
June and a September.
Okay, I was gonna say, I was thinking that I had heard, like, you would wanna take it by June 30th in order for that information to get over to the school. So another type of aid that a student will have eligibility for based on submitting FAFSA is federal student loans. So there are two types of federal student loans that your student could be eligible for. The first is a subsidized student loan, and you have to have unmet need in that cost of attendance minus EFC equals need. You have to have unmet need that hasn't been filled by other types of aid in order to be eligible for a subsidized loan. No interest accumulates on subsidized loans while the student is in school. The interest rate currently is 5.05%. It's capped at 8.25. They reevaluate interest rates every year, so I don't know what it's going to be next year. It did go up a little bit from last year to this year. As a freshman student, if you have unmet need, the maximum amount of subsidized loan that you could be eligible for is $3,500. You would also be eligible for $2,000 in unsubsidized loans, which we'll talk about next. But $3,500 is the maximum subsidized loan for a freshman. And it goes up $1,000 for sophomore year, it goes up $1,000 for your junior and senior year. So again, you have to have unmet need to have that loan eligibility, and it's not accumulating interest while you're in school. The other type is the unsubsidized loan. Need is not considered. So as long as there's room in that cost of attendance, you would have unsubsidized loan eligibility. Interest does accumulate on unsubsidized loans while you're in school. Interest rate, same thing, capped at 8.25, it's currently 5.05. There's a maximum of $5,500 per year. So that being said, as a freshman dependent student, which most of these high schoolers are going to be, you're going to be eligible for, as a student, $5,500 in loans for the year. The breakup between the subsidized and unsubsidized is determined by how much unmet need you have in your EFC. But the total between the two is going to be $5,500 regardless of what school you go to. If you qualify for that $3,500 in subsidized, you'll get the additional $2,000 in unsubsidized. If you have a really high EFC, which you probably have no unmet need, then you'd be eligible for a full $5,500 in unsubsidized. So the breakup is going to show up on your award letter. But just know that the subsidized, if you need any loan funds, you always take the subsidized first. It's the better of the two if you're offered it. When it comes to repaying those loans, students do have a 6-month grace period after they graduate before they go into repayment. Repayment period standard is 10 years. 10-year repayment plan is what you go into initially. You can adjust it. There are lots of different repayment plans, all the way up to 30 years. And there are income-based plans and deferment and forbearance options. So the nice thing about federal student loans is if your student doesn't get a job right away, or if you have something on later in life that happens, there are lots of things you can do with your loan servicer to help you out as far as your student loan payments. A dependent student, on top of that $5,500 in federal student loans, could potentially also have Parent Plus loan eligibility. And Parent Plus loans are loans for parents of undergraduate students. The parent is the borrower for these loans. The parent can borrow up to the cost of attendance minus all other financial aid that the student has. So whatever's left in that cost of attendance, you have eligibility in Parent Plus loans. Current interest rate is 7.6, it's capped at 9%. It is a credit-based loan, and repayment options do vary. Usually they go into repayment about 60 days after they actually pay to the school. You do have the option to defer these loans till the student is out of school, just like theirs automatically do. We call it in-school deferment. You just have to file some paperwork to do that. It's really simple to do. But if you don't, you're going to be getting notices that you need to repay. If you put them in in-school deferment, the interest is still going to be accumulating on the loans. So with the PLUS loans or the student loans, even though if you have them in in-school deferment, you can still make payments on them. You can still pay towards the interest. A lot of times they do notify you if you pay the interest and shows you what the difference would be as versus not paying the interest and waiting till you graduate. So if you do put them in in-school deferment, you can still make payments towards them without penalty. If a parent applies for a Parent Plus loan, and in the case of a student with married parents, only one parent has to apply. Since it's a credit-based loan, if the loan is denied based on credit, then the student can borrow an additional $4,000 in unsubsidized loans in their own name, which would take a freshman student up to $9,500 in loans for the year, which is the same amount that an independent student gets in federal loan eligibility. So if your student is short and you need a Parent Plus loan, but as a parent you don't have good credit, it's going to be denied, I can't help my student, you still may want to consider submitting the application, because with a denial they do get the additional unsubsidized loan in their own name to help them out. Any questions on loans? Outside of the federal student loan realm, there are private student loans, which we'll talk about in a minute, but that's federal student loans in a nutshell. As the video alluded to, if you borrow a federal student loan, you do, as a student, also have to complete a master promissory note and entrance counseling. They're at studentloans.gov. The school will notify you on how to do that. It's super simple. And with the Parent Plus loan, a parent would have to complete a master promissory note as well. But those are documents you sign with that FSA ID. So another reason you would want to keep them handy and safe. There is also lots of types of student employment, but one that has to do with your FAFSA is the Federal Work Study Program. Federal Work Study Program are federal funds that are given to the schools to pay students to work on campus, typically, some off-campus opportunities sometimes as well. These are paychecks that you're going to earn as a student. So it's going to show up on your award letter if you're a work study. It's going to show how much you're allowed to earn in an academic year or in a semester, depending on how they do it, because it's based on having unmet need. A student has to have unmet need to qualify for a federal work study program. Some schools have work study, federal work study jobs, and student employment that's not federal work study related, and so for those ones, need wouldn't be considered, wouldn't have anything to do with your financial aid. But for the federal work study jobs, you do have to have the unmet need. And again, it can show up on the award letter. If it doesn't, you can reach out to the financial aid office, see if you're eligible, see how to apply for work study. There is a question on the FAFSA that says, are you interested in work study program? You can put yes, no, or I don't know. And the reason, if you're somewhat interested, that you would potentially want to answer yes, is because some schools do include that information on your initial award letter, so you can see whether or not your student is eligible. If you put no, or if you put I don't know, that's okay. If you're interested later, you just go see the financial aid office. It's not locking you into anything, but that's why the question is on the FAFSA. They're trying to see whether or not you're eligible for it. But that's a really good opportunity for students who have that unmet need, because you're earning a paycheck. You can pay it back to the school if you want to offset your educational expenses right with the school, or you can just take it and use it for your other educational expenses, which include transportation, food, and everything else. I mean, that's part of going to school, so you don't necessarily have to pay it back to the school. There are also private student loans, foundations, businesses, charitable organizations. Some employers have opportunities for children of their, or employers have opportunities for their employees and their employees' children for education, so that's worth looking into. Some military benefits can be transferred to students, so if you have, if you've had service in your background and you have some benefits that you haven't used, you could potentially pass them on to your students, so that's worth looking into with the VA. When it comes to private student loans, they're also known as alternative loans, and they're offered by private lenders. So this would be outside of the federal student loan realm. Local lenders sometimes will offer private student loans. as well as companies that you can find online. There's Sallie Mae, Wells Fargo, SunTrust, Discover, College Door, Campus Door. There's all kinds of them. All you have to do is do a Google search for private student loans. You'll find one, kind of look at their terms and conditions, find one that you're comfortable with, and then submit an application directly to them. You'll indicate on there what school your student is going to, and then if you're approved, it's a credit-based loan as well, then they would send notification to the school. And those would pay, all of this type of aid that we've talked about tonight, will pay directly to the school first. So if you've borrowed more than what your student needs for their direct costs, then it would come back to the student or to you to do with whatever you need. But just remember that most of the time when your student's receiving a refund, it's loan funds, so it's gotta be paid back and you're probably paying interest at some point. So we always encourage students to only borrow what they need to cover those direct costs and not for a refund. But private student loans are a good route if you need something additional, or if you don't wanna go the federal student loan route. Just make sure you check into things. A lot of times, private student loan, interest rates are higher. They might not have as much flexibility when it comes to repayment. So just check them out really well, make sure you're comfortable with whomever you're borrowing from, whether it's the federal government or private student loans. So again, make sure you do that admissions application, as well as submit your application for the FAFSA application to your school. Apply to the FAFSA early, look over your student aid report. Make sure you satisfy all those requirements for verification if you're being asked to turn information into your school. Look over your award letter. If there's things that don't make sense on your award letter, call the school. They're not all set up the same, so you want to make sure you're comparing apples to apples when you're looking at them and comparing them. Because if one of them is showing you cost of attendance and another one is showing you just direct costs, it's going to be hard to compare where you're really going to be at. So you might need to call the school and find out what actual charges would be. Just make sure you're understanding what you're looking at so that you're really making the best decision for yourself and your student. And make sure you apply for the loans if you need them. And again, funds are sent to the schools first, so you're not going to be responsible to get those funds to the school. That's where they're going to go, and then any extra would be dispersed if it's able to be refunded. Any questions? My information is on here. If you guys have any questions, you can have great resources here in the school, but we are also always willing to help, even students who aren't going to attend Baker College. If you have questions, feel free to call me, email me, and I would be happy to help. Thanks for coming tonight.